Savior say, thy strength indeed is small. Child of weakness, watch and pray. Find in me thine all in all. Jesus paid it all to him I owe. Sin had left a crimson stain, he washed it white as snow. Thy power and thine alone can change the leper's spots and melt the heart of stone. Jesus paid it all to him I owe. Sin had left a crimson stain, Jesus died my soul to save. My lips shall still repeat. Jesus paid it all to him I owe. Sin had left a crimson stain, he washed I bore. Sin had left a crimson stain. He washed me white as snow.
Well, good evening. All right, can you hear me out there? Yeah, I've really gotten used to this chair here. This is really nice. Anyway, this is my third time doing this, and just curious, has anybody been here for all of these? Anybody? I am so impressed. That is very impressive here. So this is the next to last one. I believe Pastor Dave will be up next week as he concludes this series we've been going through on the miracles of Jesus, particularly out of the book of Luke. And so let's open a word of prayer. Will you bow your heads? Let's pray. Our Father and God, we ask you tonight, as always, that you would come and speak to our hearts, that your word may become alive. We know it's sharper than any two-edged sword. So we ask tonight, Lord, that it may slice into our hearts in such a way that we might be laid bare before you, and that you might speak to us and you might meet us where we are. Help us always, Lord, that we may take what you teach us in this book and apply it not only out there, but in here, in our hearts. It's in your name we ask and pray these things. Amen. Okay, so if, did anybody grab a handout on here? It's out in the big round table in here. It's just kind of the scripture we're going to be having working through the night. You didn't? Okay, you want to go grab one? All right, perfect. So, all right, I love that. I like the Christian charity happening here. Yeah. You want to come up here and give the message? Crickets, as soon as I say that right. Yeah. Yeah. So the passage tonight, really, it's a longer passage that's coming out of here, out of Luke chapter 7, verses 1 through 10, and then it goes through 36 through 50. I'm going to play it in just a minute. It's a very long passage, and it will seem like the two are not connected, but they really are. And I'll even mention it because this is on the miracles of Jesus. It may appear like the second part of the passage, there's not something that's miraculous, but it really is. And my prayer is that this will touch your heart tonight. As always, God's scriptures become alive when you begin to delve into them and you begin to look at them closely. So I pray tonight I'm able to communicate that. Because it's a lengthy passage, I have a video I'm going to show that's really reading right out of the NIV. That is a video I got several years ago on really the book of Luke. And so let's watch this.
When Jesus had finished saying all this to the people who were listening, he entered Capernaum. There, a centurion's servant, whom his master valued highly, was sick and about to die. The centurion heard of Jesus and sent some elders of the Jews to him, asking him to come and heal his servant. When they came to Jesus, they pleaded earnestly with him. "This man deserves to have you do this, because he loves our nation and has built our synagogue." So Jesus went with them. He was not far from the house when the centurion sent friends to say to him, "Lord, don't trouble yourself, for I do not deserve to have you come under my roof. That is why I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you. But say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, 'Go,' and he goes. And that one, 'Come,' and he comes. I say to my servant, 'Do this,' and he does it." When Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him. And turning to the crowd following him, he said, "I tell you, I have not found such great faith even in Israel." Then the men who had been sent returned to the house and found the servant well. When one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him, he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. A woman in that town who lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house. So she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. As she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, "If this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner." Jesus answered him, "Simon, I have something to tell you." "Tell me, teacher," he said. Two people owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii and the other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he forgave the debts of both. Now, which of them will love him more? Simon replied, "I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven." "You have judged correctly," Jesus said. Then he turned toward the woman and said to Simon, "Do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman, from the time I entered, has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven little, loves little." Then Jesus said to her, "Your sins are forgiven." The other guests began to say among themselves, "Who is this who even forgives sins?" Jesus said to the woman, "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace."
Okay, powerful passage. And it's a theme we hear over and over again, whether I'm sure Nathan's talked about this and David's talked about this, but who is this that can do these things? And tonight is really a common theme you've probably heard throughout the series, and that is this, particularly these passages have to do with the idea of faith and what it means. And yet what I always find remarkable about these passages is that they always come from a different angle. They teach us something new that maybe we haven't seen before. This is no exception. And it's really a contrast between two people coming from two very different backgrounds, two very different viewpoints. This Roman centurion, this soldier, and this woman of the street. And both of them, both angles talk about in the strongest way possible, what does it mean to come to faith? How do we understand faith? And this passage is going to show us faith is the key to everything. Understanding not only ourselves, understanding God. And these two stories have been given to us. And I want to kind of go in primary 3 points in that. It's on the back of on the handout there about faith. And from these angles here, and that is how faith comes to us, what faith actually is, and thirdly, where does faith take us? Because it's taken us in a direction. It's taken us somewhere better, somewhere great, somewhere special. So I want to look at these three areas just for the next few minutes and talk about this. First of all, that is how faith comes to us. How does this develop? And the answer here really, it comes to us, is that faith is very disruptive. What do I mean by that? Well, when you look at if you look at the centurion, when you look at this man, some religious leaders are coming to Jesus and telling him, you need to talk to this man. And the reason why is that they come to him and they say, his servant's dying. we know very quickly from this passage he's a man of some kind of stature. And the reason why they want Jesus to come and help this man is because he said he's one of the biggest supporters of us. In some sense, he's our benefactor. He's the one that he's built a synagogue. He's the one that makes many things go. And therefore, you owe it to us to help this man. And because of that, they feel obligated for Jesus to do something, which I think is always kind of funny. In some sense, these religious leaders are trying to distance themselves from Jesus, and yet they're saying, okay, but can we use you here to help the guy that's helping us? Because they don't believe. Those religious leaders, it's very obvious to them. They're trying to constantly trap Jesus. They don't believe, and yet they know enough to know, he might be able to do something about this. When you look back at the previous chapters, you can kind of see this. But the religious leaders at this point do not believe Jesus, and yet the centurion does believe Jesus. We'll see that in just a second. It's very apparent that he believes deeply that Jesus can do something about this. And we see this in verses 4 and 6. You see it in your handout, but I'll put it up here. So they earnestly begged, that is, these religious leaders earnestly begged to help the man. And it says, if anyone deserves help, what does it say? He does. If anyone deserves. Now, you can already tell right off the bat, these religious leaders, they've already kind of missed the point, because they say, if anyone deserves it. Okay, now, first of all, we know throughout the Gospels, nobody deserves it. And deserve has nothing to do with it. I cannot help but think of the Clint Eastwood movie, Unforgiven. Did you ever see that? Okay, blank stares. I don't deserve this. Deserve's got nothing to do with it. It's the same thing with this passage here. Deserve has nothing to do with it. And so I say that because it's really important to understand this. If we understand not only him, but we even understand the woman in the street. We'll see this in both cases here. And in verse 6, the centurion says, I don't deserve it. I'm not worthy of it. He goes on to say down here, I'm not worthy of such an honor, it says. And what you begin to realize is here, why would he say that, and what leads to this? And when you begin to realize that faith is very disruptive in many cases. I imagine that if I were to talk to many of you here and sit down with you and you would tell me your stories about how you came to Christ, where God became more real to you, I'd be willing to bet a lot of you would share stories with me about trials and tribulations and hardships and the time the rug was pulled out from under you, or you lost something or someone very important to you. And this is absolutely the case here with the centurion. Usually we do not ask the big questions in life. I've discovered, talking to people over the years, and certainly in my own life, I usually don't ask the big questions when the wind is at my back, when all is well, when everything's working in my life. Usually I begin to ask the big questions, or I begin to really draw closer to God when I feel like I have nowhere else to go. Anybody ever experienced that? You feel like the woman with the bleeding problem a few weeks ago I was here. You can't help me. The world can't help me. There's nobody that can help me. And this Roman centurion, we don't know this whole background, but we do know that he must have felt compelled to come to talk to Jesus because this person that he dearly cares about is dying. And he says there, okay, I'm not even worthy of such an honor. Now, what I find remarkable about this passage here is that the fact that he's coming and telling Jesus to think about, he's a man of some kind of stature, some kind of authority here. And so he risks all kind of, this is risky for him to come to Jesus because he knows everybody's watching, and yet these leaders are basically compelling him, you've got to help this man. And yet he comes to Jesus in some sense desperate. And one of the things I find remarkable about this is that very often we do not hear from God when things are going well. And what I find remarkable about this passage here, I want to put a picture up here. This is a picture that was captured several years ago from somebody's dash cam. Now, this is a bolt of lightning. And why is it, I'm just asking you, what is so unusual about this picture? Anybody guess? It's not a trick question. It's in the middle of the day, and it's a blue sky, right? So occasionally people do find God when everything's going well, and their lives are nothing but blue skies. A bolt of lightning will hit. But that is not my experience. Most of us seem to hear from the Lord when it's like this, right? When the storms move in, when it seems dark, when there's lightning all around us, this is when we seem to hear from the Lord the most. And it's certainly the case with this here. And one of the things I find interesting in the Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis, if you don't know that book, it's a book that Lewis wrote. I was just over in Oxford a few weeks ago. I actually sat in the exact pew he sat in the middle of a church service when he was listening to the minister, and he began to get bored. Okay, I'm sure this has never happened to any of us. And he got this idea in his head: what would it be like to write a book where a devil is writing a junior devil about how to tempt a Christian or how to bring down a Christian? And it was just genius. So, for example, Lewis writes in one of these places in here, the senior devil writes to the junior devil, "I see that you're patient, or your person has become a Christian, and I see that he has become humble. Have you let him know that he's become humble? Let him know he's become humble, and then when he knows that, he'll become prideful about his humility, and therefore the humility will be removed. And if suddenly he realizes that he's become prideful, and he tries to smother it with more humility, make him become prideful about that. Do as much as it takes to bring this patient down, this Christian down." And what Lewis does here is he writes this, the senior devil writes the junior devil about, I see that your patient or your Christian is now beginning to ask real questions in their life. In other words, the bottom has dropped out, or they don't know what to do, and they're looking for answers. The key to that is make them become as busy as they possibly can. If you can swamp them in busyness and busyness of life, they will no longer ask the questions here because they're just busy with everything else. He wrote this 80 years ago, and yet I would say this is exactly how we feel right now. I mean, do y'all feel like this sometimes? You're so busy you can't even find yourself time to think? Nobody asked the big questions here. In fact, to take this even a step further, Leo Tolstoy, the great writer, when he had a crisis in his life, he writes a confession in one of his books, and he said that to him, one of the great questions that he said brought me to the very edge of my life is, what am I here for? Why am I living? Is there any meaning in my life? And not only that, he goes on to say, what happens when I die? Like, all the stuff I've ever done, is it just going to be forgotten in 50 years or 100 years? In other words, are any things I do in this life, or is anything imperishable? Or is it all gone? And he said, the only thing that I'm amazed about more than that is the fact that we don't ask this question more often. That we get caught up in the busyness of life. So most don't ask this question. They're too hard or they're too scary. And life just gets moving along, and you don't ask these questions. So for this example, for this centurion, the bad times don't create the need. They just reveal it. So, for example, the lightning reveals that something's going on in your life. Let me take this even a step further. I'm going to get a little philosophical here about how I think this is the case. I'll give one example I heard my brother give. Just how often we notice something's wrong. Faith will begin to reveal that something's wrong, but you may not even notice it's the case. My brother's best friend, my brother went to the University of Tennessee, graduated many years ago. His best friend is in charge of the concessions or all the food at Bank of America Stadium in Charlotte, where the Panthers play and they have concerts and stuff. And he was sharing us with one occasion that when the Panthers went 15-1 that year, when they won all their games practically, he said after every game, do you know how many complaints he got after the game? He said he could count them on one hand. 3 years earlier, when they went 1-15, do you know how many complaints he got at the end of the game? Hundreds. The beer wasn't cold enough. The food wasn't warm enough. The lines are too long. He said it was the exact same circumstances. And that is sometimes when things begin to go wrong, you just begin to notice everything's wrong with our world. Let me take this even a step further. This is just an awesome illustration. I've shared this with you maybe a few years ago, but it's worth sharing again. I'm not on social media anymore. And it's been one of the greatest blessings of my life not being on it. I'm not making any judgments on any people on it, but for me, it's just good to be ignorant. But back 7 or 8 years ago when I was on it, there's a part of Facebook called Bluffton Ask. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Well, people come on and ask questions or make comments about Bluffton, like where's a good doctor to find, or what's a good Italian restaurant to eat at, or what is this going on in this corner, and what happened to wreck on 170 or something like that. And you ask questions. Well, somebody put on there a few years ago this question up here: what problems or issues do you have with living in Bluffton or Hilton Head? And they go, this could be anything as far as like traffic or parking or whatever. So they put this question out there. This got so much mileage in Bluffton. I mean, people begin to comment in every single thing wrong with Bluffton. And in a matter of like an hour, there were 206 comments, okay? 206 telling us everything wrong with Bluffton. Now, I have lived in a lot of communities over my life. I think Bluffton is one of the greatest communities I've ever lived in. So I decided the next day I want to try something here. So I put on there the next day, I put up here this question. In contrast to yesterday, what are some things that you love about Bluffton? Okay? I wanted to put it out there. Do you know how many comments we got back? Okay? 19. Okay, so let me put this up here real time, okay? So we have 206 comments, everything wrong with Bluffton, versus 19. Now, I'm not a mathematician, but this appears to be about 10-1. Is that right? Okay. And now we can laugh at this and stuff like this, but what this tells me is we know when something's wrong. It's very easy to point that out. I've never heard anybody say, the problem with the world right now is we just have too many blessings. The problem with the world is, it's just too much peace going on right now. The problem with the world is, all my ends are meeting right now. The problem is, I'm just too healthy right now. But we notice when something's not right, when our health goes wrong, or we see a death happen, or we see something unjust and some kind of injustice take place, or we see starvation. Where does this idea come from that this is wrong? It should not be like this. In other words, C.S. Lewis said, how can we tell a line is crooked unless there's a straight line to compare it to? And where does the idea of the straight line come from? I would tell you it's been put in there by God. So the centurion knows, my servant is dying. This is not right. He just doesn't say, we know death is just natural. And what are you going to do about it? He decides to do something about it. So what it does is it disrupts his life enough to get out and to go and to talk to Jesus. So faith comes in that way. But it leads me to the second part, and that is, what is faith? It actually does, I think, three things here, maybe many more, but let me just put out three that have come up to me, and that is these three areas. It gives us, it's a new direction, it sets really a new foundation here, and it's a new attraction. So let me just kind of walk through these here. A new direction. What do I mean by that? Well, this is a saving faith here, because Jesus says at the end of this chapter, he says here, I'll put it up here, your faith has saved you. What is so interesting about this is I looked into this. The word saved there, it's the same word that is used for healed. So think about this. He's saying here, this is This is a faith that is radical because it does several things. He's saying it heals you, but it also saves you. Think how far-reaching that is. And how does that affect us when this healing comes in our lives? And the answer is that faith connects us to the healing power of Jesus to come into our lives, and it really does change the direction of our lives. And Luke is trying to show us here, it's not about just some kind of general faith, but the kind of faith that heals. And what do I mean by that? Well, it says here that the faith is directed, but where is it directed toward? And I think part of the answer comes in here in verse 8, where the centurion says, and I want to put it up here, I myself, I'm a man under authority with soldiers under me. And I tell you this one, go, and he goes. That one, come, and he comes. And I say to my servant, do this, and he goes, and he does it. Now, what's interesting here, on the one hand, this is faith. And he's saying here, I know that he's basically saying to Jesus, I know you're not just another miracle worker. I've seen these people come along and claim this stuff. But I've also seen that you seem to have a lot of power that I haven't seen before. And I know you do not have to come to my house to make this happen. I know you can do it right here. And of course, when you think about the illustration here, he says here, I myself am a man under authority. Notice here, he doesn't say he's a man with authority. He says, I'm a man under authority. And I find this kind of somewhat amazing. He's a centurion. When I looked this up, a centurion literally means he was over 100 legionaries. That's where the word century comes from there. He was over a large group of people. And we know the centurions in the Greco-Roman world were the backbone of the Roman Empire. The centurions, were accountable to the generals, and the generals were accountable to the Caesar, to the Roman emperor. And if you know much about the Roman army, you know how severe it was to break ranks or not to follow orders. It often meant death, which meant if the directive came down from the king to the generals, to the centurions, they were followed without discussion here. And so the centurion is saying here, I have no authority in myself, but because I have such a tight relationship with my superior or my general, who has a tight relationship with the person above him, the fact that what he says to me, I know that I have power just because of orders. And what's the implication here is? The implication is I realize maybe in myself, I don't have authority, but I know you do. And I know if you say you can heal somebody, it will happen here. Because when you say and you talk to this father of yours, you seem to have a relationship with this father of yours that's tighter than anything I've ever seen before. And so Jesus' divine power begins to go right into his life here. And think about this. We see this in other places. The principle is the same in Mark chapter, the part of Mark, let me put the passage up here, where Mark 9, where the father comes to Jesus and says, can you please heal my son? And he said, do you believe? And he says, I do believe, but what? But help me overcome my unbelief. You ever felt like that? Okay. That like there's a part of us that says, okay, I know you're capable of doing this. I know you can do this. But there's this other side of us that say, I'm just not sure, right? Well, the centurion comes and says, I think you can do this, but there's part of me that wonders, but I know you can because I know you're a man under authority. I know you talk to your father. I know this could happen. And the implication here is Jesus' divine power can heal people. And when he says here, if you have faith, and he says, I do have faith, we know that this centurion, we know he discovers later on that his servant's been healed. Now, let me take this a little step further here. I think this is really, really important. And I talked about this a few weeks ago about the woman with the bleeding problem versus Jairus. It's not just the direction of our faith, it's where we place our faith, the object of our faith. And this is really, really important in this passage here. And let me give an illustration here why this is so important. I'll put a picture up here of a mountain climber. That looks a little dangerous, wouldn't you think? Okay, I'm not going to be doing. My son is a climber. He likes climbing the side of rocks. I do not have that same inclination to do that, but he's gotten really good at it. But just imagine with me if you have two people climbing here, and you come to a ledge, and there are only two ways off this ledge, two choices. And one of them, if you step on one part of the rock, you're going down the ravine and you're not making it. You're on the road to glory. Okay. The other side is a rock you stand on and it's safe. But imagine the person who steps on the faulty rock and says, I believe with all my heart. This is my truth. This rock will hold. And they stand on that rock and it doesn't hold and they fall to their death. Versus the other person says, I have no idea this is going to hold. I don't think this is going to hold. I don't think this is going to hold. But they step on the rock and they're safe. Did it really matter how great the faith was of the other person who said, I believe with all my heart? No, it doesn't, does it? It matters where they placed what they placed their faith in, that the rock will hold. I hear this all the time with people nowadays, all the time. People say, basically the question is, well, it doesn't really matter what you believe, as long as you just believe with all your heart. Well, can you imagine telling that to your doctor? Listen, you got cancer. No, I don't believe that. I believe with all my heart that's not true. You got a question?
Is that blind faith?
Well, you mean the person stepping on the rock?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was blind faith. I don't necessarily believe in blind faith. I think for example, I sat on this chair tonight. Is this blind faith that I sat on the chair that was going to hold me up? Yeah, I guess, but I've sat on a million times before, so I know it was going to hold me. But I learned that only through learning to sit on it over and over and over and over and over again. So I guess there's levels to understand that. That's a great question. But the whole point of it is what we put our faith in. It's really the direction of our faith. The other part here is what I would call a new foundation of our faith. The centurion here in this first instance, and he's the first part, but the second point is this woman. And I want to mention about her, and I'll get this in just a minute. But the contrast between these two could not be greater, because you have the Roman centurion as a man of a pillar in the community, very virtuous, very, very moral, and you have this other woman who, if you look at other translations, it says the woman of the city, which everybody knew would meant that she was a prostitute. And I just want to say something about that because nobody in the ancient world no woman wanted to go into prostitution. They were often forced into it. Either they grew up in poverty or they were divorced, no fault of their own. And in order to be able to even survive, they were often forced to go into this. So we have no idea of the background of this woman, and we don't have a whole lot of idea about the Roman centurion. But we do know that Jesus says something about his faith and that it's remarkable here. Because we do know something because he was a centurion. We know he had to be, and obviously, because we can see what the religious leaders thought of him, he had to be someone of virtue, because you could tell they had high esteem of him. And if you notice, look what it says here in the passage here. When the religious leaders came to Jesus, they pleaded with him. And they said, this man deserves to have you do this. And why does he say he deserves it? Well, they give reasons for this. First of all, they say he loves our nation, which meant, in some sense, he's patriotic. Okay, or that he wasn't some kind of typical Roman racist attitude toward these conquered inhabitants. He actually respected them as a people. Secondly, it says there that he's built us a synagogue. Now, I don't know how much it would cost to build a synagogue, but I imagine it was pretty costly, wouldn't you think? Which probably means that he was probably a Gentile worshiper there of this biblical God. At the very least, it means he's incredibly generous and probably virtuous and very devout. Because virtuous people, to do something like this takes time. It takes time to become virtuous. You have to work at it here. So something happened where he felt compelled to love this nation and to give generously. And the leaders say, because of that, he is worthy for you to do what this man asked. And what does the centurion say about himself? This is remarkable. He said, Lord, I don't want you to trouble yourself, for I do not deserve to have you come under my roof. This is why I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you. Now, do you see the difference, how he sees himself versus how the religious leaders who should know better, how they see themselves? He recognizes right off the bat where he is in standing with this compared to the religious people. The religious leaders say he's worthy, do what he asks. And they're working, those religious leaders are working on a completely different paradigm, the world's paradigm. I would say a paradigm that still is alive in our day and age. And that is God's power comes to people who deserve it. God's power works in people who are smart. God's power comes into people's lives who are moral. God's power comes into people whose lives who earned it. But this centurion pushes against this entire paradigm here. Because look what he says here. And what he says is really quite astounding here. He has a completely different paradigm shift. He comes to Jesus and he says, I'm not worthy to even to have you even come into my own house or on any other basis here. It has nothing to do with my moral virtue or my generosity. It's none of those things like that. And Jesus basically says, this man gets it. He gets it. He understands it. And think about this. He's saying this in front of all these religious people. This guy gets it, and you guys don't here. And so what's going on here? Well, saving faith in Jesus Christ is not just about believing in Jesus Christ in some kind of general way, like a lot of people do. Like Jesus is some kind of lucky rabbit foot, that he's there when you get into jam, when you need something here. It's transferring our fundamental, basic life trust and to put it into who Jesus Christ is. Because this man, this centurion, he's very, very moral. He's very, very virtuous. He's very, very generous. In fact, I would dare say he's the type of guy we'd love to welcome into our churches. Wow, did you see how much he gave? That new wing in our church he built? He deserves, Jonathan, for you to go visit him in the hospital more often, because look what he's done. And I would probably go, So that's what they're saying here, because he deserves it here. But this man seems to understand this has nothing to do with deserve or not. This has to do with my faith that I believe you can do something to heal my servant here. He doesn't quite understand Jesus completely, I'm sure of this. His faith is imperfect. And yet he seems to get it, which I love, because our faith does not have to be perfect. We do not have to have complete understanding, but it's who and where we direct our faith. And what is so remarkable about this, and why I include this other passage in here about this sinful woman, because it's all the passages later here, and I want to put this portrait up here, I think captures this beautifully here. She is the very other end of the spectrum here. Think about this. You have the Roman centurion who is generous, a man of moral virtue, a pillar in a community, someone all the religious people love and adore and respect. Do you think they went out and told Jesus, hey, can you come help her? No, she's in the other end of this. It says, okay, I'll put the passage up here, a woman in the town who lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house. Okay, again, other translations say a woman of the city. Now, she was a woman of the streets, and she does two things in this passage that I think are really, really quite stunning and astounding. The first thing she does is she lets her hair down. Now, in the ancient world, and particularly even in Judaism, to let your hair down was something that was incredibly intimate. And you would never, ever do it in public. In fact, in other parts of Judaism, we know the Talmud at least says that if a woman if a woman who's married lets her hair down in front of anybody else but her husband, that is grounds for divorce. So the fact that she does this, it would have been scandalous that she did it. And now that she does it in a Pharisee's home. There's all kind. Now, I'll talk about this in a minute. This is not done from some kind of intimacy factor. We're going to see why she does this in a minute. And this is where I did not see this until I began to dig and dig and dig and dig. And you begin to, it's like all of God's word. It just begins to be treasures just all over the place. But it's not just she lets her hair down. The other part is this alabaster flask that this little thing. And this, we know what one of these looks like. They think it almost looked exactly like this one. We found several of these in ancient Rome. This little oblong shape, it's not that big. They were very, very expensive, very beautiful, and they would carry very expensive perfume or oil inside of them. These jars were made from translucent, compact rock and this long, skinny neck. And the very top of that, the one here is a little wider, but the very top is usually a very, very small opening. It got bigger as it got to the top, but it was a very small opening. And the idea was, these are very expensive to buy, but you poured the oil in, but it had a very hard time getting out, the oil did, or the perfume. But the idea is that it would produce a smell whenever the person was wearing it around their neck. And the only people that were able to afford this was usually wealthy people or a person who made a living on the streets, being attractive, being desirous. And this was around this woman's neck. And now why would she have that? Well, I don't have to go into great detail here on this, but think about this. Back in that time, people didn't have deodorant. And I'm just going on a limb here to say probably people didn't smell the best. But if you had money or you had you could make yourself smell better if you had this around your neck, because it would produce this odor of perfume that would mask anything else. In some sense, it was some sense of sign of wealth, but for her, it was how she made her living. It was how she became desirous, how she became beautiful here. And what's amazing about this is when you turn it over, it didn't pour out. The way that it was designed, it was not meant to pour out. This is what I kind of learned from doing this. So then how did she get the oil out of that? Well, the only way she could pour all that on Jesus' feet is if she actually broke the flask, if she broke it. And what I find amazing about this is I was trying to figure out, looking up, how much was in this thing? How much money are we talking about here? And we know that a couple other passages, there's similar passages like this from somebody else, but I'm in agreement with some of the commentators on this. When Jesus is given this parable, this illustration about someone being forgiven, and he said to Simon, someone's forgiven 50 denarii and someone's forgiven 500 denarii. I think that's how much this thing was worth. I think it was worth 500 denarii, which is a ton of money, a lot of money. It's probably a year and a half's worth of wages, just because Jesus says that in here. And she breaks it, and she pours it on his feet, and she wipes her feet with her hair. And the only thing she had in the world that was of any wealth was her desirability, her attractiveness. And she's basically pouring this out on Jesus' feet. And so it just kind of begs the question, what is going on here? Why is she doing this? And it brings it back to full circle about both these two, a woman of the city and the centurion. The woman of the city, the thing she trusted in, the thing that really gave her meaning, or the foundation of her life is she wasn't a pillar in the community. She wasn't someone who was known as being generous. She wasn't someone who's known as being good or moral or virtuous. She couldn't say any of that. The only thing she had about was her beauty, was her desirability, was her allure. And she basically comes to Jesus and she said, everything I have, the very fundamental thing that makes me who I am, that controls my life, I am now breaking it and I'm now pouring it over your feet. In another sense, she was giving up everything she owed, everything she owned. It was gone. Because I trust in you, because I've trusted in you, I've set my heart free. And she weeps these tears, and it's interesting. I don't know what you guys think, but I'll just ask the question here. I don't think there's an answer to this, but do you think these tears were tears of joy or tears of brokenness? I don't know. Yeah, Mike?
Had to be hope.
It could be. I just thought about this because I'm thinking, and I'll mention this in the end, she had enough information of Jesus. She probably saw Jesus preach and saw how he treated other people, where the fact that she felt compelled to break into a Pharisee's home, because he never would have let her in there, ever, that she had the gall and the guts to go in there. And he saw her. He saw her. Not how the community saw her. He saw her how God saw her. And it had to be, in some sense, tears of brokenness, of joy, of hope, probably of happiness. I don't know. It's probably a bunch of things. That's why I'm saying I don't think there's an answer to this. I think it's all of them, all the above here. And she's basically saying the foundation of my life, I'm now cracking open, and I'm letting my hair down. I'm pouring everything I own on your feet, and she's kissing his feet. The very foundation of her life is she's just basically broken it and given it away here. And I think it kind of begs the question here. And I kind of came up with this question as I was thought about this. So she was wearing this flask around her, this little tiny oil thing she carried around here, and she broke it. She broke it, and any money she had was now gone, which is why there's been argument. Other places in the arguments in Scripture, why is she wasting all this money? That's not the point. It's what she was giving up. And I want to ask the question here for us here: what are our oil flask? In other words, what are the things we have hanging around our neck that we say we have to have, that we cannot lose? The things that control us. I'd be willing to bet, I don't know, maybe we're even aware of some of these things, what they are. Because this is juxtaposed here, and I want to put this up here. This is really important to know this. It's easy to miss this. Besides Jesus Christ, there are three central figures in this passage here. Now, most of us just think it's the woman and it's the centurion, but there's somebody else in this passage, isn't there? Okay, I'll put the picture up here. You have the woman in the streets, you have the Roman centurion, and who do you have over here? You have Simon, the Pharisee here, because he is right smack in the middle of this passage here. Three central figures here: the centurion, the prostitute, and the Pharisee. And Simon has invited Jesus into his home, and as a Pharisee, I know you've heard this before, but I'm saying to you again, I don't know if I've ever come across any group of people in history that are more moral than these people. They are the most moral, straightforward, like they are just, everything's black and white. Never, they would strain just the tiniest gnat to make sure they would never step in any kind of sin, the most moral people of society. So the fact that this Pharisee is inviting Jesus into his home would have been an incredible honor for Jesus. And hospitality then means infinitely more than it even does today. So this is Simon's way of saying, I've heard some really good things about you, Jesus. I don't know if I agree with all of them, but I can... I don't know which side, and I may want to be a part of your campaign, I want to support you a little bit. And And Jesus goes to him. And Jesus didn't go to a lot of religious leaders, but he did with him, which tells me, at least for Simon, it tells me he must be somewhat sincere. The fact he's inviting Jesus to come. And the fact that Jesus is willing to go. And Simon had saw Jesus teaching. He saw his miracles. And he says, I think there's probably a pretty good chance that this guy is a prophet. Because I don't think he could do the things he's doing here. So Simon's warm, he's respectful, he seems very rational in his belief with Jesus. I want to be on the right side here. You seem like a good man. Until the woman shows up. And then he begins to change. And Simon immediately begins to delineate the difference between himself and her. And we hear it here. When this Pharisee, Simon, who invited him, saw this, he said to himself, okay, and I want to highlight this here, if this man were a prophet. Now, he said this to himself, so he's thinking this. This is what's so cool about this. He's thinking this, going, if Jesus had any idea who this woman was, if he was actually a prophet, he would know. Again, he would know. He would know that she's a sinner. And what is so funny here is Jesus could see what he is thinking here. And he turned to Simon in verse 44, and I want to play this. We're going to play this up here. I think we have this recorded here. You ready for me to play this? All right.
Do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman, from the time I entered, has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet.
Now, I want to put this picture up here. I think this represents where she was in her life. This is a painting someone did many years ago of her. Jesus is basically saying to Simon, why have you not been treating me like she has? Look at the devotion. She is weeping on my feet. She's kissing my feet. She's given me every single thing she has. And the reason why is you see me as just this. You just see me as a prophet. You just see me as this person. But she sees me as so much more. Simon, this is the kind of faith that actually transforms people. This is the kind of faith that actually saves people. Because I think Simon at this point is kind of the average churchgoer. It's good that I go to church because, my tank is mostly full. But I come to church to kind of get God to kind of top me off a little bit, to finish me off. But there's no letting down your hair. There's no pouring out your flask. There's no weeping. There's no brokenness here. There's no passion. And so I think the question comes up, and I'm asking myself this, is how do we go from Simon's faith to this right here? And Jesus tells a parable. He says, let me tell you something. And he does a little trick here in Simon. He says, you don't think I'm a prophet? Okay, let me tell you what you're thinking. I would love to have been there to see this here. Because I would just love to see just the look on Simon's face. So he's like, howdy, what? And this is always the best person. This is always you can always tell the best teachers when they can teach you in such a way, as I always say, they can step on your toes without messing up your shine. Where Tim Keller used to do this with me. He would say something to me, and later on walk away. I'm like, I think he just insulted me in the nicest possible way he could do. You'd walk away, gosh, he just taught me something oh my gosh, you just think about this. Okay, so he says, let me tell you a story. There are two people. One owes this incredible amount of money. One owns a little bit of money to the same person. And this person forgives this great amount versus someone who gives just a little amount. Who do you think is going to be more appreciative? Who do you think is going to love that person who gave them money more? And he states the obvious. He said the person who's forgiven of a great amount of debt. And what Jesus is saying to him is really quite obvious. She knows how great her debt is. You do not. She knows she's been given this great amount. You think you've just been forgiven maybe 50 denarii. When really, if he really thought about it, it's much greater than that. And he's saying there, he was basically saying, she seems to get it. She knows why I'm here. She knows why I'm here. She knows why I'm here. And to some level, I think she even knows that Jesus Christ is going to die. I think she seems to know this because he knows he's been sent by God. He was pierced for our transgressions. The iniquity of us all is upon him. And God will be satisfied because he has poured out his soul unto death. And so Simon had come to Jesus because of obligation. She's coming to Jesus for a completely different reason. It's this last part up here, the attraction. This is what faith often does. Faith will often compel us or push us or pull us to giving our lives to God. Because Simon here, he's not breaking his flask open. He's not letting his hair down. In fact, I can imagine Simon going, what? You want to be like her? That's too wide open. That's too crazy here. There's no pouring out. There's no passion. There's no transformation here. And yet she seems to be drawn to the beauty of God. She seems to be drawn to the beauty of God. And let me just give an illustration of this. Let me give you two illustrations of this. How we see something beautiful. It has the ability to change us. This is why I've said often from the pulpit, and I mean this, trying to guilt people into change does not work. Believe me, I have tried. And I've been on the other end of it. What changes people, what changes the heart is when they see something more beautiful than what they already see. So for example, when I was in Pawleys Island as a youth minister, there was a man in a church, 40 years old, lifetime smoker. I think he smoked something like 2 packs a day. We all tried to get him to stop. And believe me, he tried. He'd gotten married later in life, and he had a little 7-year-old daughter. He had tried patches. He had tried nicotine gum. He had tried hypnosis. Nothing could get him to stop. He's like, I just can't stop. And then one day, I remember him telling me he just stopped cold turkey, stopped smoking altogether. And I'm like, what did you do? Like, what? And he said, well, back maybe 6 months ago, I was on the front porch in my house. I was reading the newspaper. Remember those things, newspapers? Do you remember these things? And he had a cigarette in his mouth. He's reading his newspaper. And he said his little 7-year-old daughter came out, and she had been in class earlier that week, and they were talking about the dangers of smoking. And she saw this, and she pulled down the newspaper like that, and he noticed she was crying. And she said, Daddy, I think this is going to kill you. And she says, I want to get married to you one day. And she's 7 years old. She didn't understand. I want to get married to you one day. He said the pain on her face was enough to make him quit smoking forever. In other words, the beauty of his daughter caused him to never want to touch it again. So gum, patches, hypnosis, none of that worked. This did. He saw something greater, something more beautiful. Let me give you another example of this. St. Augustine, who I think, in my opinion, is the most influential Christian in human history. It's insane to think about this, but at the age of 31, he held the highest academic chair in the world at age 31. He was more than just a genius. He was just unlike anything we've ever seen before. Wasn't a Christian, was addicted to power, and he was a sex addict. And he did not know how to break free of it. And slowly, he began to see the beauty of God from a distance, but he didn't know what to do about it. He didn't know how to break free from it. He didn't know how to break free from being a sex addict. And when he began to see the light of God, it began to shine in this darkness, and he began to see the beauty of God. Remember, as John says, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness cannot overcome it. And he writes in his book Confessions, he said, I was held back by mere trifles. Now, the only way you can know what a trifle is if you see something better than that. Because at one point he thought the trifles were it. And he saw something more meaningful. And the only way you begin to see something more meaningful is you begin to see the things beneath you are not as meaningful as they used to be here. You got to see something more powerful, more beautiful, more enjoyable, more delightful, more thrilling, more satisfying, more attractive. And that's exactly what began to happen with Augustine. So he began to realize, okay, his oil flask were not giving him what they used to give him. And he says here, basically the oil flask, or these temptations, they plucked at my garment of flesh and whispered, this is what these things do to us, do you think you can get rid of me? Do you think you can walk away from this? From this? Never again will you be able to have me. He says, I was beside myself. I tore my hair. I locked my fingers. He says, I hugged my knees. He's in a fetal position because he didn't know how to break free. And he said, while I stood trembling at the barrier on the other side, he says, and he has this vision in Confessions, I was looking across the river on the other side and I could see the beauty of God on the other side. I didn't know how to get there. And he beckoned me to cross over and to hesitate no more. And he stretched out his loving arms and welcomed me. He saw the attractiveness of God. And so for Augustine, and I think every single one of us in here, he basically was weighing what we all have at one point. He had the oil flask in his hand, and he had Jesus Christ over here. And he had to finally ask himself, which is more beautiful? And he finally saw the beauty of God for what it was, and he was changed forever. And that's why he famously said, God, you've made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless and will always be restless until they find rest in you. And this is the other thing he says. Listen to this. This is just so beautiful.
All my empty dreams suddenly lost their charm, and my heart began to throb with a bewildering passion for the wisdom of eternal truth. My God, how I burned with longing to have wings to carry me back to you, away from all earthly things, although I had no idea what you would do with me.
I love that because I think this last part, I was drawn to the beauty of God, but I had no idea what you would do with me. It didn't matter anymore. He arrived at the point, Lord, take me where you want to take me. This is exactly what's happening here with this woman. I don't know how I'm going to make a living. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm placing my trust in you. I'm pouring out all my oil. And see, this really brings us to this last point here, and that is where faith takes us. Because Jesus upholds the idea here, and this is what I'm kind of saying to you. If you feel forgiven little, you will love little. But if you feel like you have been forgiven much, you will love much. You will love greatly here. And Jesus Christ is basically saying this to here, and let me get to this last point, and that is where faith takes us. It takes us to the place where the more you go deeper into God, the more you begin to realize we see our own fragility, we see our own flawedness, we see our own sinfulness. As Tim used to say, what the gospel teaches us is we are more broken, we're more flawed, we're more wicked, we're more sinful than we probably even understand it, but we say it and own it. We pour out the flask, we let our hair down. And yet the other side of the gospel is because Jesus Christ came and lived the life we should have lived, he died the death we deserve, we are also more loved and we're more accepted than we ever dared possibly hope for at the very same time. Flawed and yet loved. The centurion saw it, and she saw it. My hope is that we will see it here as well. Continue to plunge yourself into God's love. How faith comes, it disrupts us. What faith is, a new direction, a new foundation, a new attraction, and where it takes us to him. Let's pray. Lord, we pray tonight that you may help us take our feeble faith and continue to come to you, whether it is like the centurion or like this woman. We pour out our flask at your feet. We kiss you. We hug you. We weep with you. We weep over you. Meet us where we are, Lord. Make our faith come alive in such a way that we might be like these two, changed. It's in your name we ask and pray these things. Amen. All right, so Anybody have any questions, thoughts before you leave? Yes.
So, is the miracle the faith?
That's a really good question. The question is the miracle the faith? Because, yes.
You see, because this is about faith.
Mm-hmm.
And you see the faith that the centurion has, and the miracle is that his servant is healed.
Yes.
And with the woman, she has her faith. Is her miracle healing?
Yeah, remember he says your faith has saved you?
Or is it what possibly Simon learned from this experience?
I guess it could be from Simon. My belief has always been the fact that she came there and basically broke into the house. The faith she was going to get to Jesus, he says, your faith has healed you, go in peace. This is what people say, well, what miracle is there? It was the miracle of salvation. That's the greatest miracle of them all. I mean, everybody thinks the physical healing is the greatest thing, but that's why when that guy gets lowered into Jesus' house and they go, how dare you heal? And Jesus said, just so I can prove how great I am, what is greater? To say this man get up and walk, or to say his sins are forgiven? Just so you know that I'm the Son of Man, get up and go home, your sins are forgiven. And he did it. He's like saying, you can pick either one of them. Both of them are a miracle. So I always say, this is important for us to hear. Salvation is a miracle for everybody. If it's not because we were better, or I was smarter, like in the faith, or I was a little more humble, which is not true. It's because God entered into our lives. So faith, everybody's faith is a miracle. I don't understand it. I can't explain it. I just know it when I see it. So I don't know. That's a good question. Yeah. Anybody else? Comments?
So taking his thought, I would argue that the expression of their faith by the centurion coming and saying, hey, you don't need to come, you can command.
Yeah.
Or the expression of her faith is, I just have to love on you.
Yeah.
The only way I know how. It's probably more significant. It's back to James.
Yeah.
Faith without works is dead.
Yeah. Yeah, he's commenting that their actions of their faith is really what Jesus is saying, that they're exercising the faith that they believe in, basically, the fact that they're showing up. Yeah. Whether it's the centurion or for her. Both of them come from completely different angles. That's what's so remarkable about this. The man who's the most moral guy in the world and versus someone who would say they're not. Yet they both their faith was, both of them were beautiful. All right, we're running over, so go in peace.